This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to my Monday Twilight show with me, Hannah Wilson. Tonight I'm joined by Toria Bono, who's going to be talking about her book, Tiny Voices Talk, Education, Engagement, Empowerment. So feel free to add in your messages if you have any questions you'd like to ask.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right, Toria?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Brilliant. This is a good start. Thank you so much for coming and joining my show. I'm so excited to talk to you about this. It feels like it's been a long time in the making, but it's waiting for that time of the year where things calm down, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to say things have calmed down. They haven't. They seem to be going faster and faster and faster. But yeah, it's been a long time in the making, and I'm so pleased to finally be here with you.
And I imagine this book must have been a long time in the making. It's got so much in it. How long did it take you to kind of put this all together?
Oh, much longer than I thought. So I remember having the initial conversation with Ian Gilbert in April 2021. I got the initial submissions in the summer of 2021, and there were sort of 70 plus submissions that came in. And I've never written a book before, and it wasn't something that I really knew anything about. So I just assumed, as you do, that basically all the submissions would come in, and then I'd put a title on the front and I'd send it off, and that would be the book done. That's not the case. It really isn't. So I sent it off, and it was 1,000 plus words long, and basically Crown House came back and said it's too long, and actually you haven't written anything. I think I'd written a 1-paragraph introduction, but because it was all about everyone else's voice, I felt really awkward using my own voice. So we sort of went back to the drawing board with the many contributions, and then many months later, I think it was October 2022, it was finally published. But it took hours and days and weeks of reading through, checking, and just making sure that my vision, that sounds really bizarre, but my vision of what I wanted actually worked.
It's getting it to all work together, and it does, because like as I read through it, I was like, oh, this one's my favourite, and then I get to the next one, I'm like, oh no, this is my new favourite, and I found that the whole way through. I've really struggled to pick ones to talk to you about, because I'm like, I like them all. So I can't imagine if you had even more than that, trying to narrow it down must have been very difficult.
It was really challenging. Plus, because I'm all about giving people voice, it was really tricky having to say to some people, I'm really sorry, we can't use your piece. But actually what I did was I focused purely on the engagement, the education, the engagement, the empowerment. Every single piece needed to tick those 3 boxes. So there were a lot of amazing contributions that were about people's educational journeys, where they'd come from, where they'd gone to, but they didn't necessarily empower the reader. They didn't necessarily give the reader something to take away with them. And as a teacher, very selfishly, if I do anything, I want a bit of a takeaway. Know, and that was really important to me. So the reader didn't just feel that they were reading many stories, but actually they were gaining something to put into their own practice.
I think that's the thing. So like all of it, I was like, oh yeah, or a lot of them either resonated with me, or I was like, oh
Mm,
yes, I like that, or that's what I do. I do that too, and it was really nice to kind of read. And there's bits like I think later on it talks about a book club, and that's something I want to start. And
yeah.
I'm like, oh okay, now I've got somewhere to start because I had no idea how to kind of think about that. So there's like little bits for kind of everybody and everything. It's just so broad.
Yeah, and I think I wanted a lot of the time we talk about education as in the different sectors. So you've got the early years, you've got your primary, you've got your secondary, further education, higher education, and yet never the twain shall meet. But actually, we are all part of a child's journey from the beginning to the end of their education. And I think what I really wanted to create was more of a collective voice. And lots of people who have read the early years things have gone, oh my goodness, I'm in secondary, but that really resonates. And primary teachers who have read the secondary contributions have done the same. So it's more about people understanding and recognizing the power of each sector and actually how it reflects their own sector.
I completely agree because we had that argument at my house because my mum's a teacher, but she was originally a primary school teacher, and my
Yeah.
sister's a Senko. And then I'm very much curriculum, so we kind of it does cross over far more than people consider.
It really does. And where I saw that most, if I'm honest, was on Twitter, in my sort of early days on Twitter when I created the sort of Tiny Voice Talks thing on there. And suddenly I was chatting away to people that were teaching in a different sector to me, and yet I had so much in common with them. And I thought, wow, often as teachers, we don't even get to chat to people that are at the same at a primary school down the road. But here I am talking to all these people from different sectors in education, and we have so much in common. And I really wanted to sort of tap into that. And I do the same with the podcast. I want to tap into the fact that we are educators in every sense across every sector.
And how did kind of the Twitter start originally? What kind of made you come up? Was it just purely by coincidence that you had that kind of hashtag and then it just flew?
Oh, it was me throwing my toys out the pram, if I'm honest. I honestly, I got really stroppy one night. So I had recently joined Twitter for the second time as such in January 2020. And I put a couple of tweets out there and no one answered them. And I was getting really annoyed because I was like, well, that's not fair. Like, if you've got a big voice on Twitter, everyone answers and you get like 300 comments and you get 3 million retweets. And I put something out there, which is actually a valid question, and no one answers it. And I found myself really getting annoyed. And I also found myself getting very tongue tied on Twitter. So people would put out questions like, I'm teaching year four. Has anyone got any good book recommendations? And I did, but I would go, oh gosh, what if no one likes my recommendations? What if my recommendations are really poor? What if I recommend something that everyone jumps on and goes, oh my God, that's like the worst recommendation ever? So I thought, no. So I didn't have a voice, but I was really annoyed that I didn't have a voice because I was thinking, well, I have every right to be here. Anyway, what happened, and I don't quite know how it occurred, I ended up talking to another couple of tiny voices that I'd never talked to before. And we decided, it was very much, I said, right, well, I'm going to create something that is for tiny voices to find their voice. So it started off as, it wasn't tiny, it was Tiny Voice Tuesday, because I decided on Tuesdays, tiny voices would be heard. Then there was Tiny Voice Tuesday Unites. Then I created a TVT tag team, which is basically any tiny voice that had a question would be answered by the TVT tag team. And I think I had 250 plus educators that were willing
Wow.
to answer questions. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that's phenomenal. And I would tag them in. So I put the question out and I'd tag them in. And then, as I say, the Tiny Voice Tuesday Unites thing which I put it at the beginning of, on my profile at the beginning of a Tuesday, and people would just say, hi, this is me. And it was just it was like a community center where people would enter and just say, hello, this is me. please enter, please say hi. And a very easy way for people to find their voice. Now, it's just so happened that I did that in February 2020. And if you remember rightly, March 2020, most educators were either teaching from their houses or were going in and teaching in bubbles, which was incredibly isolating. And what happened was Tiny Voice Tuesday Unites fundamentally erupted because so many educators just wanted to say, hi, this is me. I'm feeling alone at the moment. And so I think at its height, there were about 500 people on there a week just saying hi. And from there, that's when the podcast I was asked to start a podcast. So it all happened accidentally because I threw my toys out the pram.
But it's just amazing, isn't it? Especially, I think that was the thing with COVID, is that everyone was at home and it was just this big unknown. And not that, like, I do think for some reason teachers get a bit of a bad press that we're all at home and we're sat at home and you feel like you're doing stuff, but it's really difficult to know whether you're doing the right stuff when the media are saying that you're not really doing anything. But we are, and we know that we are, and we know that we're doing good. But sometimes it's just that reassurance, especially with the unknown of COVID, that we were doing the right thing. It was just nice to be able to connect with other people.
It was so necessary because it was an incredibly lonely, tricky time, I think, for educators, because as you say, we weren't necessarily getting the best press. We were often being lambasted for something that we were doing wrong, even though we were trying absolutely everything, and it didn't seem to matter what we did in the way of virtual teaching, remote teaching, or indeed face-to-face teaching, we weren't getting it right. And I think it was an incredibly challenging time. I feel that sometimes the press can be quite hard on teachers because I think, because we are looking after children, people can be like, oh, well, they're not doing well by the children. But actually, we worked so hard. I don't know any educator that wasn't working their socks off over COVID to give their children the very best education they could. And I think, getting together on Twitter and just feeling one amongst many and just feeling that level of support was so critical because actually a lot of us had lost our school communities. Even when we were going in, I don't know about you or anyone listening, but I was, the first time round I went in and I was basically teaching a bubble, and that was the only people that I was allowed to see. There was no staff room, there was no community, there was no chatting to other teachers. It was, I walked in, I taught my bubble, I left. It was really incredibly hard.
It was just a really different time, and it was really isolating. And I think it was kind of having that place to kind of be reassured, and I think it was new territory as well, which makes everybody nervous. But actually I think as teachers we kind of took it on board and developed, and the niceness of everybody sharing and supporting each other. I did feel like as a community we kind of all came together. Everyone was quite happy to, like, this is what I'm doing, this, have this resource, and it kind of, I feel, brought teachers together a little bit more.
It really did. And I think that's so vital because teaching can be one of those jobs that it can feel somewhat isolating if you let it, because we are going into a classroom. We are often on our own within that classroom. We might have a teaching assistant, but it sounds bizarre because we're surrounded by people all the time, but it can be a very solitary profession if we're not careful.
And I think that's the nice thing about it is that you have this place where people can go and talk and find that place where they can ask a question that they're afraid perhaps to ask in the staff room, that there's somewhere else that they can do it, like, not safely, but have that place that the community aren't going to reject them, they're only going to support them.
Yeah. And I think because often, even within your own school, people can become very nervous about asking a question because I think, oh, I don't want to say that because people would just think I'm silly. But actually, on a forum where questions are just the natural thing to do, it's really safe. And actually, some people just wanted me to ask questions but not name them. They didn't want to be retweeted or whatever. They just wanted an anonymous question asked, and that felt really safe for them. But they got the answers they needed.
And from that, kind of, where did you decide to write this book? Was that quite early on from it, or was it actually
No.
something that just kind of somebody approached you, or did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, well, everything I've done has just been an accident, if I'm honest. I never, people find it strange, but I never overly plan anything, and I sort of happen upon stuff quite accidentally. So what happened was I started the podcast in August 2020. I was asked if I would start a podcast to interview quieter voices in education. So I started the podcast Tiny Voice Talks, and I've put out weekly episodes ever since, just interviewing the quieter educators, actually from all over the world. I've spoken to some fascinating people, I really have. And I then was approached by Paul Dix to host a show for Teacher Hug Radio called Origins. And I was doing that, and one of my guests happened to be Ian Gilbert. And at the end of interviewing him, he said to me, and this was all off air, he said, are you Tiny Voice? Because I never ever told anyone that I was Tiny Voice Talks. So it was just, I was just Toria who did the interviews on Teach Hug Radio, but I never sort of said, oh, and now I do this as well. And he said, are you Tiny? And I went, yeah, I am. And I was amazed that he'd even heard of Tiny Voice, but I've subsequently learned that lots of people have heard of Tiny Voice and what went on. And so he said, wow, I've heard about you, and I've heard about the stuff that you've been doing, blah, blah, blah. Do you think there's a book in it? And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose here. So I thought, oh, of course, yes, absolutely. And he said, and what would this book look like? And I think in that conversation, I threw everything in the kitchen sink into what my idea for this book would look like. And he said, oh, right. He said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you through an author questionnaire. So again, when I got the author questionnaire, I threw everything into it, including the kitchen sink. And Ian came back to me and said, well, I do think we might need to hone it down slightly because, it's quite mammoth what you're thinking. And it was actually, so it came from there. And never in a million years did I think that initial conversation would lead to the book. And that's the funny thing, because nothing I've ever done has ever been intentional. But I think so many people actually feel they have a tiny voice. And so really engage with the concept of Tiny Voice Talks and actually being heard. And that's sort of what's happened. I think, from the Twitter, the Twitter tag, which still goes on every Tuesday on my, you'll see people saying hi, to the podcast, to the book. It's all about, educators feeling empowered and sharing their experience to benefit the lives of other educators and children.
I think that's it. I very much resonate with this. I have very much kind of imposter syndrome, and I feel like I know what I'm talking about, and I know I'm good at what I do. And I'm an art teacher, but I'm national subject lead, so I help 46 schools across the trust with a couple of other art teachers. And but I still feel imposter syndrome when I'm offering advice and suggestions, and when I'm on kind of see different ones come up, I'm like, oh, I could answer that. It took quite a long time of kind of writing things and then going, oh no, they'll just think I'm silly and deleting it. It took quite a few years before I'm like, no, I'm now confident enough that I can actually send that and know that I'm offering actually sound advice. It really took quite a few years to kind of build up that confidence. So it's definitely, I think, I don't know whether that's a teacher thing that we're so used to putting on kind of almost a show in front of the class, or whether that we kind of all have these tiny little voices in the back of our head, but we're just so used to having that bravado, whether perhaps teachers are misunderstood in terms of thinking that we're always confident.
I think, I I actually have beginning of this year, I completed a coaching apprenticeship. I was very pleased, a level 5 coaching apprenticeship and a level 5 diploma in coaching. Alongside everything else in the book, I decided to do that. And what I found really interesting coaching teachers is that, yes, that imposter syndrome is something that seems to resonate with most teachers. And I think because we are so other focused, we are so focused on the other people in our world, whether that be our colleagues, mainly the children in our classroom, actually we lose sight of who we are, and we lose sight of our accomplishments at times. And sitting back and talking about those and saying, look at what I've achieved, is actually really, really challenging. It's much easier to negate what we've done and say, well done to someone else. But it's, and I found that with coachee after coachee after coachee, the fact that actually feeling enough and actually feeling good about who we are as educators is challenging. Which is why, that's why I put the empowerment thing in the book, why I'm always talking about empowerment. It's so important that we feel empowered. We're very, very good at empowering others. But are we ensuring we're empowering ourselves?
And it's that, I think I'm trying to find where it is now, that bit at the end where it's like, don't forget to kind of like promote others and be positive, but also like be you, but be compassionate. Like we're all human at the end of the day, and not be so hard on ourselves and also other people. So it's I did enjoy that. It just made me think of that bit. But you've got kind of it's split into 6 sections. And what did you kind of decide on those bits? So you've got Tiny Voices talk about being that teacher, talk about teaching, inclusion, professional personal development, stories, and ways to find your voice. So I don't know whether you want to start on the was it easy to find where to start? I imagined it must have been quite difficult.
Well, as I say, my initial starting point was just basically putting all the stories together, sending them off to, a Crown House and saying, there you go, I'm done. And them coming back and going, oh, no. And I mean, they gave some sound advice. What they said was you need to section it. You need to make it very clear that there are sections to the book. You need to introduce each section, and your voice as such is the thread that runs through it, that connects everything together. And you keep bringing people back to the tiny voice element of it. So I went away with the various chapters and I thought, okay, what is it that I really want, the people to be reading about? And I think that concept of being that teacher, we want to be that teacher. I don't know any teacher that becomes a teacher and goes, oh, do you know what? I just want to be an average teacher, basically. I don't really care that much. I don't know anyone. Most teachers want to be a teacher that is remembered when a child is 70 years old talking to their grandchildren going, oh, I remember Mrs. So-and-so, because actually we do our job. And I think so many of us are really passionate about doing our job well, that we want to touch the lives of our children that so much that we are memorable, and we really do show that we care deeply. And to me, that is that teacher. I had anyone that's read the book will know that my actual education as a child was pretty horrific. It was, I had one teacher that was that teacher, and the rest proved that they really weren't. And that teacher, I had two teachers, and it was the 2 teachers I had that I knew I wanted to be like. And that's what that first part was very much about, because as I was reading the various contributions, that was coming up again and again and again with people's voices. Basically, the fact that actually there are certain things that you can do that really, really support and help young people. And I think, yeah, so that's where that came from, because I was thinking, well, how do I fit all of this together? And I've got to be honest and say, Leanne Herring, her chapter, which is Be That Teacher, gave me the idea of naming the whole section Tiny Voices Talk About Being That Teacher.
And it's funny to say that, because I take a group of kids surfing after school, and I was talking to the surf instructor, and he's actually contemplating becoming a teacher, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know," and I was like, "Oh, but it's just so good." He's like, he's saying that how he really likes having when they have the special schools come, or the schools where the children's have misbehaved too much, they go and say that. He's like, I like connecting with those kids, and I was like, that's what the teaching is about. It's not necessarily it's finding the connections with the different kids and seeing them succeed. It's so gratifying, and it's not necessarily the hard kids. Yes, they're harder and testing, but actually they're more enjoyable to teach when you get that connection and you can see them grow. It's just a really lovely place to be. So it's just, yeah, it just really made, I was like, oh, it's just like this. It's like almost like that's the high, that's the positive, that's why you do the hard work, that's the bit that really kind of is the payback almost, for giving everything to your job. They're the little moments.
Yeah, and I've been teaching in the same catchment for the best part of 23 years, so within a mile radius, and I actually live in the middle of that as well, I'd just like to state, which is even more frightening. I taught in the infant school for 13 years. I went elsewhere for 5 years, came back, and I now teach in the junior school, and they're both sixth form intakes, so they're huge schools, and I live in the middle, and I bump in an awful lot to ex students, and they always say hello, they always smile, and they're always really polite, and it makes me glow, because I think, oh, it's so nice that actually they're not running the other direction from me, and I really relish that. I love the fact when I bump into old students.
It's that, and I think it's also that time of year, isn't it, when you get thank you cards when the GCSE students are leaving. I remember it was actually a Christmas card that I've still got it. I kept hold of it, of a student saying that they find school really dark, they really struggle to come into school, but my lessons are the bit that they look forward to, and they make coming into school easier. And I kept that card, and that kid is now leaving me this year and is a completely different student, but they've been off on study leave, and when they've been coming in for their exams, apparently they've been trying to find me, and I've got a broken foot. I don't work that hard quickly around school, but they came and found me on my lunch break in another room. They were like, "I've been looking for you all week," and I was like, "Oh, sorry." They were like, "We haven't caught up. We haven't had a chat about everything. I've like really missed like talking to you and finding out, like explaining everything that's going on." It's like I just didn't realise going on study leave how much I missed like just having you as a teacher. And it was like, oh, it was lovely to see how happy they were before they left as well. But yeah, you just don't realise how much of an impact you can have, because sometimes they're having a hard time at home, and that actually we're the constant and we're the positive. And we need to not forget about that.
Absolutely. And I mean, you are that teacher to that student, and I just think that's so important. It really is, being that teacher.
And I think as well, like as teachers, with the government, we need to have our voices heard more as teachers, and that was something that kind of drew me in a couple of the sections on the first chapter, because obviously there's the bit about better period education, and I think that's something that definitely needs to be improved. And I think as well, like with schools coming in with like the menopause policies as well, but actually that's probably something that we need to teach our children about, and actually get them to understand it at a way earlier age than us having to figure it out and work it out by ourselves later on. And I think it's interesting how legislation goes through, but actually as a collective, if we shout loud enough, these things can change. But it is like quite often reading these, and same as the trauma-informed practice, obviously with COVID, there's just so much more trauma that these children have experienced, and actually we need to really look at how we deal with that and what that means for our students, and things need to change. And I think it's one of those, we're getting there in terms of kind of what education needs, but is still not necessarily getting across to the public, and kind of what schools require to really help the students more, because it's more than just your core subject.
Yes, it is so much more. I mean, I've been teaching now, as I say, for 20 plus years, and it is a different world. Teaching education is a different world from the one that I initially qualified in, really. And I found when I joined Twitter in 2020, I was learning about stuff that hadn't even dawned on me before. It really hadn't. And it was fascinating reading Gemma's piece on period education, because, I, as a year four teacher, I teach about periods, but I hadn't considered half the things that she was writing about. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's so important that we get this absolutely right. And I've just finished my period education. Was it last week? Yes, I did lessons in it. And actually my teaching of period education was 3 million times better because of what I have learned from Gemma, interestingly. And I think that each chapter has really improved my practice.
And that's the thing. They're not long chapters. They're like
No.
little snippets. And I like the fact that at the top of them as well it says how long they take to read. So it's like, okay, I've got this long. I'm going to have this one tonight, and then I'm like, I'm feeling a bit tired. I'm going to go for a shorter one. Or
Well,
maybe I
that's
can
the
squeeze in
teacher in
2-3
me.
minutes.
Yeah, that's the teacher in me. It's like, oh, break time. Right, I've got 3 minutes. I'm going to quickly read this. Or lunchtime. Oh, I've got a couple. Because we have so little time in our day.
Yeah.
We have massive to-do lists, so little time. And sometimes, if you pick up a book, an education book, they can be huge tomes. You think, oh goodness, I just don't know quite where to start. Whereas this is very much, let's dip in, and I'm going to tell you how long it's going to take you to read this chapter. So yeah, that was the idea. Because for me, actually, you asked how I originally set out. I originally set it out with all the timings in order.
Oh, okay.
That was my original thing, and that was, and a Crown said, actually, that's great on one level, but on another, you're not really telling people what sort of section they're going into. And I was like, okay, that's why I
Yeah, but
changed it.
I think as teachers that's quite nice though. I think it is that, like, I've not got long, but I want to just
Yeah.
check out and just do a little bit something. It's also, I'm like quite aware of how quickly I fall asleep depending on the time of the year we're at. The
Yes.
week before half term, I need 3-minute ones, but
Mm.
yeah, and it's just. It's like you can really hear your voice as well at the start of each ones, and it's nice to kind of see your take on it, and then see how the like kind of articles kind of reflect that afterwards, which is nice. But I like the fact, I don't think you write like you were some kind of rebel, but I don't believe it.
Oh, it's hilarious. I think I'm really quite beige, but apparently I am relatively rebellious. Um, but I sort of, I don't know. I'm very I have very strong opinions in the educational world, I think, because I really deeply care about the children I teach getting the right sort of education. And I think that's why, if I jump to the Tiny Voice Talks about inclusion, the reason I wanted a whole section on inclusion is because I felt really strongly that inclusion is something that has grown so much over the last 5 years. And I I have I have really worked hard to develop my own understanding about it, that I wanted inclusion to be very much part of the book, and for us to actually look at not just special needs, but also, LGBTQIA plus, race, disability, all of that, and not shy away from any of it, because we can't, as educators, we cannot shy away. We have to be educated, we have to understand, and we have to ensure that we are doing the right thing.
And that's the thing, like I'm crossing over a couple of them now, but there's the one that's like staying under the radar and talks about kind of
Yeah,
not wanting people to know. I think was it autism that they had,
yeah,
and not wanting
and
people
that is
to
a
know.
yeah. That was a teaching assistant wrote that, and he didn't want people to know that he had autism because he was worried that he would be judged. I know teachers who are dyslexic that don't want to say I am
Well,
dyslexic
that's my
because
one. I'm
ah,
dyslexic,
right.
and actually, I kind of I remember having very, very like difficult times in school because I
Mm,
spelt very phonetically, and I spelt they Thay. And I
yeah.
remember my English teacher getting so annoyed with me in primary school. They made me write it out 100 times.
Oh my
About halfway
gosh.
through, I changed to Thay again, and I wrote it about 50 times the wrong way and didn't even realise.
Mm,
I was just so oblivious to it. And like I remember having spelling tests, and they said that if everyone got 30 out of 30, the teacher would do the can on the table and buy us all McDonald's. And I was the only student to get 29 one week and ruined it for everybody. But it's just like that pressure.
yeah.
But it wasn't actually until I got one of my colleagues at school is an English teacher, and she's dyslexic, and the science teacher is also dyslexic. So we have a secret dyslexic society where we let the dyslexic students know that we're dyslexic.
Mm,
And actually, when she came onto my show and we did a chat about it, and it wasn't actually till I spoke out loud about it that we
mm,
realised that we did a lot of the same things. Like when we had CPDs, we'd read like the first couple of lines and then we'd skip and read the last paragraph, so that when it
yeah.
came to talking about it, it made it look like we'd talk through all of it, but actually in hindsight we were never going to be quick enough to read it all.
Yeah.
So it was the little coping things we did. But it is quite funny when we go, I'm like, right, so I'm dyslexic, so I know I hate spelling tests, so I'm not going to, when I give the results out, if anybody, we're going to go for like 9 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10 because I
Mm,
can't do it to you guys. And I explain them the story, and they're like, I'm dyslexic too, but they will shout it out. And it's like, it's now like this proud thing that we are
yeah.
in our, rather than it being this secret thing. But we're saying that actually it's like our super, we our PowerPoints are beautiful because we're really creative. We're
Mm,
like, it's just like nobody else beats me on displays and stuff. And it's like, because actually there are positive sides to it. It's just finding it. But yeah, that one definitely resonated with me. But the two kind of initially, I was quite secret about it. It wasn't actually till I started
yeah.
talking to other people. I was like, actually, this shouldn't be something that holds me back. It should be something it's got positives to it as well.
But I think that's it. I mean, that's so wonderful that you are using it and you're sharing your superpower with others and talking about actually the positives within there, the things that you're really great at. Because I know people that are terrified of letting people know that they, are dyslexic or have ADHD or autism or whatever, just out of fear of, oh, if I share that, then I will be judged. And it's actually, well, you're neurodivergent. You're not, we should not, in education especially, we should not be judging people for being neurodivergent. And I think it's something that I address in the book, and
Yeah.
I, I feel really strongly about it. So yeah, going back to your point, am I a rebel? I probably am.
I just
Although I try really hard not to be.
it's
I
that
try.
it's that fighting for what you believe in
Mm,
education, isn't it?
yeah, and I can't not. That's my problem. I'm really, really well behaved unless something really bothers me, and then I just can't ignore it. I really can't.
See, I'm exactly the same. So I get really annoyed if people try and make out that it's those students, it's just that class, they're just a bad class, that's why the results are bad. And I'm like, no, because I
Mm,
teach those same kids and I get good results. Like
yeah.
it's not the class. You just haven't worked out how to teach them properly. But don't blame them because it's not them. And I that's one of my things that I raised my head up at, and I'm just like, nope, no,
Mm.
because they can be good and they can work. You've just got to find out how to make them tick. It's quite interesting.
Absolutely. I think, that's one of the things that I struggle with. I don't like it. It's actually in his chapter, in Mr. B's chapter, he does finish with, look at the able, not the label. I think that's his chapter. And I
Yes.
think that's so important. Let's not label people. Let's not label classes or groups of children or a child or indeed a staff member. you know, let's look at them as a whole, and look at what they can do, look at that able part of them, and really sort of try to enhance that.
And I think that's the thing. It's difficult in education because there's this pressure on them all to do well in English and maths,
Yeah,
and have this kind of good progress 8 score. But actually, that not doesn't always necessarily benefit the student. And actually, it's kind of working out where their passions lie and where their strengths lie, and getting. I
yeah.
think education should be flipped a little bit in terms of it's getting them to find a career that they can be happy in and have good well-being. That doesn't necessarily rely on salary. It's about contentment.
And I forget what the actual factors are now, but I know that I think it's in 10 or 20 years' time, the jobs that we are training children for now basically won't be around, because life is changing so much, digital worlds are changing so much. If you look at Google and so on, I mean, Google, someone said to me that Google now don't actually do any initial training for employees, because everything's always changing. So any initial training they do would be absolutely redundant by the next day.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, wow. And I think it's so important that we are forward looking and really considering that we are basically creating children for the future that ahead of us, that we actually don't know what it looks like, and they're not. Who was I was speaking to one guest on the podcast, and he said we're still teaching them in Victorian classrooms, classrooms that were sort of created in the Victorian era. We're still teaching in that way in certain schools, and actually what we're doing is we need to be teaching children for the careers that they're going to be going into potentially.
I think that's my golden egg, is the fact that I'm like, oh well, at least if you take an art subject, that's not gonna be, it's the one that's least likely to be autonomized and made into robots. So it's just it's suddenly it becomes a little bit more appealing that it is actually something that's not going to change that much. There's still going to be the need for the people to be creative, to come up with the ideas. So I guess it's that voice, isn't it? Championing. Oh, you've got that in the start, haven't you? Championing your person. But I like to champion my subject. I'm quite a bore like that.
But I think that's really important. I think creativity is absolutely vital. I don't know about secondary, but I know whenever children came back into primary after COVID, a lot of creativity had been knocked out of them. They weren't quite sure how to be creative because there hadn't necessarily been online. They were doing lots of sort of the reading, writing, math stuff, but they weren't necessarily harnessing their creative side in the way that they do in school. And I think creativity is so, so vital.
And I think it's that thing as well that I can't remember, you wrote it in one of your pre-words about us as teachers always developing as well. And I think that we need to learn to be more creative, and we need to learn all the different ways that students learn, and make sure we're adapting and we're enhancing what we deliver and not delivering the exact same thing, because the students aren't the same each year anymore. They're developing. They're becoming from a much more of a tech early years that we need to kind of develop and change, and we need to keep fresh as well.
Yeah, and I said that in the professional and personal development. I'm actually just looking, it really is a rant. I start off with a rant. I hadn't realised how much I was ranting at that point. Yeah, I do think that we need to prioritise our personal and professional development. It's really, really important. I think we need to, I mean, as I say, I've been teaching for over 20 years. How I taught when I first started teaching, I don't teach like that at all anymore. I have continually had to work on my professional development in order to keep up to date, because education is continually changing. And I'm really passionate about teachers, making sure that they are doing the right thing for their professional development, but also for their personal development. And I think professional development also, I bang on about the career ladder in there, because I've got a bit of a thing about the fact that I think within education, people see it very much as I just need to climb the ladder, and after I do this, I do this, and after I do this, I do this. And I personally think that everyone's professional development is their own and should be created by them. I suppose that, it's the creativity. Like, where do you want to be, and what do you want to do, and what do you want your career to look like? And it sounds, when I'm talking to you, it sounds like your career is really exciting because you're an art teacher, but also you're leading art across, is it 46 schools, which is so exciting. And actually, you've developed your career in a way that really works for you and probably makes you feel alive and excited.
And that's the thing, because I get to look at kind of primary schools to special needs schools. So I've got the whole range in there as well. So it's quite interesting seeing all the different ways different schools do it and the different hurdles that different schools face, and having to come up with different like ways of problem solving in different situations. And I really enjoy that. But I do think that, especially we're having our network day, so we're actually trying to get the kids all out, the teachers out for the day, to all be together and work at university, which is a great opportunity. But it's kind of get the buy-in from the teachers and then from the heads of the school to send them. And I think that's something like I don't want to go into the topic of the strikes and things, but yes, pay is important, but I also think like teacher workload is really important, and actually we need to address that because it's becoming more and more and more. And actually, if they were saying kind of actually teachers need kind of one extra free a week, then actually the teaching is going to be better. Also, I feel like every teacher should be entitled to at least half a day of professional development, and it become a norm and be encouraged for teachers to do that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think professional development and having in a sense a wider, more affordable way for teachers to engage in professional development. One of the things that really winds me up, so I do rant and I don't mean to.
Go for it.
But it really winds me up. So I am a full-time teacher / year leader, and yet lots and lots of conferences happen in the weekdays.
Yeah.
And I think, well, who is that benefiting? Because it's not benefiting the teachers in the classrooms that actually potentially are the ones that really need that professional development. So who is it benefiting? And I thought, I often, there was lots of stuff advertised, I think it was yesterday or at the weekend on Twitter. And they look great conferences, but they're when I'm teaching. And
that's the thing. Is that balance? Do the children suffer because they're going to have cover and then you're not going to be there, or it's that, or do you go and see the day and then you've, in theory, hopefully it's going to benefit the student in the long term? I've had a bit of a rough year. I broke my foot, got a DVT and a pulmonary embolism, so I've been off and on. I had off and on a little bit, so I just feel like I know that the university down the road's got a lovely teacher day next week, and I'm like, I can't miss any more lessons because it's just not going to benefit the students at this point. But yeah, the flip side of that is we've got a network of East Anglian art teachers, and there's various networks around the country that were set up by art teachers for that exact reason. So they tend to do sessions on a Saturday or a Sunday where we can go and create, and they're not very often, but it's just great to go and collab and things. But that was because we could never ever get to ones during the week because we weren't allowed out.
But I think that's the case. I think cover, schools at the moment are, budgets, all of that with the electricity prices, the gas prices, everything else is just being hit left, right and centre. I think getting cover for a day to release someone, as well as, say, the conference, it just is a lot of money. And I think it's tricky because then what happens is that teachers aren't getting the professional development because they can't afford it, can't access it, etc. It's really, really tricky. But I passionately believe that as teachers we need professional development, which is why I love everything that's out there on Twitter, because I think it's really vital for us to engage with others and learn. It really is.
I think that's the thing. I have my moments. Like I'm quite addicted to it, and then I'll have moments where I'm like, oh, actually, I'll just kind of just I don't have the brain space to do Twitter, and then other moments
Mm,
I'm like, oh, I'll lose all evening, kind of scrolling through and reading stuff and reading what people are doing, and then it's just really like inspiring.
yeah, it really is. And I think there haven't been any recently, but there was some absolutely brilliant virtual conferences at one point, and that was really amazing. Sitting in my bedroom, listening to these unbelievable inspirational speakers, really special. But of course, what's happened now is now that everyone's, back out there, no one's really doing anything virtually anymore. And I think that it is, it, yeah, it's, it's so important that we engage professionally, but also, with our personal development, as I bang on about in the book a lot.
I was kind of that when COVID happened and everything went online. I was like a kid in a candy shop, like watching
Mm,
everything. We had research ed that was meant to be here, but they did that all virtually. And me and my friends, I think there was something like 30 odd videos, and we divided and conquered. Like we all watched five each, and then we all said which was our best one, and
yeah,
then we all went back through and watched them all. So in theory, we watched the whole entire thing between us. But other people wouldn't, like, outside of, we were all at different schools, but outside of us, nobody else from our school like listened or watched to it. It's that's why I'm looking at the book club one. I was like, I don't know how to get
yeah.
other teachers to be engaged in professional development kind of outside of kind of the inset, like I have to be here, I have to sit and listen to this, like how to get them excited and engaged in it.
I think it's that case of just building it. I mean, interestingly, Dave has just um, been on the Tiny Voice Talks podcast to talk about the book club. And I think it's really what he says. It was a slow burn, but it eventually began to develop and develop and develop. What they did was they did it virtually, but they invited the authors of the books in.
Oh, nice.
And that was a great seller because, of course, you get the book, you invite the authors in, they talk about the book, and actually people were more willing to come along and were able to really ask questions of the author as well as chat away about what they thought. And I think it's a genius idea, really.
It is. I just think that I don't know. You've made this look very easy. I'm like, oh God, would I write an educational book? It looks like a lot of energy, and I don't know how you do it on top of teaching. But also, it's kind of
And
one of
doing the
those
coaching
that
apprenticeship. I just need to state I
yes.
did it alongside the coaching apprenticeship as well, whilst working full time as a teacher.
You're inspiring me. I'm doing my apprenticeship in senior
Oh,
leadership at the moment. I was like,
oh,
maybe I
are
should just tag it
you?
on the end.
Yes.
It's yeah, but that's why I'm like, because I have to log 6 hours of off the job work.
Mm,
I am reading and doing a lot more, and I'm really really enjoying it. But I don't know whether I'd have necessarily read this much if I hadn't had that motivation to do it. But I guess it's that thing, isn't it, of finding a why and what drives you as to, and I think that's a little bit my, I feel like I've got a small voice being an art teacher. I feel like I'm not necessarily taken as seriously as in senior leadership as a core subject, but I love my role, but I'm also like, I really want to run my own school one day, like, and the
mm,
more I read as well, it's like I want my school to be like that. And like reading your book, I really want it to have all these inclusive pockets, and I want it to kind of be very nurturing and empathetic and understand stuff, because I think that can be lost a little bit as well, in the fact that it's like, oh, you can't have that number of days off, oh, that try and get your hospital appointments outside of school, and that kind of, we forget that people are humans and every day happens, and that
yeah,
everybody's situation is different. And actually, although teaching is stressful, and I imagine senior leadership is incredibly stressful post COVID, but actually we need to think about kind of what it means. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that teachers are people as well, as they're not just this
yeah.
machine, this cog.
I think that's vital, and that's actually why I did the coaching apprenticeship because, um, weirdly, it all goes back to Tiny Voice Talk. So when I was interviewing people for the podcast, I really loved listening. I loved listening to them, and I loved sort of trying to understand where they were coming from. And I decided to do to start the coaching because I thought I'd really like to help people. And I think in our educational world, we can be, and I've said this earlier, we can be very other focused. We can be very worried about everyone else and we can forget ourselves. And actually, looking after ourselves, looking after our personal development is so absolutely vital if we are to function well in the classroom, because we are the weather in our classroom. You know, if we go in and we're having a grumpy day, the children are affected. If we go in and we're having sort of a really happy sunshiny day, the children are going to have a whale of a time. But it's really hard, I think, to be able to coach ourselves, which is why I wanted to be able to offer coaching. And, you know, my head has been really fantastic in, well, you know, I qualified and then she sort of said, well, what do you want to do with it? And I was like, I just want to coach teachers when I can. So I coach teachers in the morning before I start teaching.
Oh,
and
lovely.
I love it. And loads of teachers say, oh, it's great because it sort of sets me up for the day. And it really helps teachers to feel good about themselves, because that well-being, what you were alluding to, is that well-being is absolutely vital. We need to look after our staff.
And I think I had Jim Knight on last week talking about instructional coaching, and I just find it really interesting and how you kind of flip it and get them to be more reflective. And I think that's one thing that could develop in teaching.
I don't do that sort of coaching at all.
But that kind of the
so
element
the coaching I do is very much about personal coaching, I suppose. So it's not teaching coaching.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just thinking in terms of kind of developing yourself, like you have it like period, you had the ECT years, and that's great that that's changed to 2 years rather than it being 1. But after that, other than your kind of performance management targets, kind of that idea of kind of coaching kind of disappears, and you're not necessarily as reflective as you could be. And actually, I feel like that should be kept in some way throughout your kind of educational career, that you'll have those opportunities to reflect, but also from a well-being point of view, to have those reflection points, those pauses, and to think about where you are and what you need. Like, we don't necessarily do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, the coaching that I do is very focused on well-being, workload, and looking, coachees setting themselves goals, like, subject leaders wanting to be able to write an action plan or whatever. And actually me just sitting in the coach role as opposed to any other role. My role is not to give them the answers. I merely listen. And I think I've seen that happen so often in leadership, where leaders are given coaches, but not as much with regards to teachers. And I think it's really vital, because teachers need to. We could drown underneath our workload currently. We really could. And I think it's so important that we learn to manage that workload and not drown.
It's knowing when to stop, because I feel like I could work every minute of every day and it would never be enough. It would never be done. And actually it took quite a long time into my career before I realised that actually me stopping and not doing it all isn't going to change the level of education those children will get. If anything, it's going to be better, because I'm going to have more energy and I'm not going to be as tired. But it is that, especially early on, you feel like you have to get everything on that to-do list done. I have a to-do book, it's that big. But it's that kind of, no, I'm not working past this point, I'm done. I need to have that balance, otherwise I am going to burn out. It's very tricky, especially for, I think, younger teachers early on in their career.
I think it's really challenging. I was very lucky. My mum was a teacher, and my mum said to me, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. Number 1, don't worry about your to-do list. You will never, ever, ever get to the end of it. And number 2, make sure you take at least 1 day off at the weekend. And I have stuck to, the bit of that, the to-do list, I just don't worry about it. And I always take at least 1 day off at the weekend. And that just helps me to feel better. She's a wise woman, my mother.
Mine's a teacher as well. I was trying to work it out. I think a lot of the hosts on Teacher Talk Radio have all got parents that are in education. So we're just like, does it make you more like not ambitious but more driven and more vocal being a child of a teacher, because you've got that kind of like, in my day it was like this, but you kind of, you I don't know, you've got that. Is it in the blood? Do you just know how to do it?
I don't know. It's a funny one because I was really anti becoming a teacher. But I do wonder if it's in the blood. I do wonder if you naturally are able to do it more. I don't know. Good question.
See, I was the same. I didn't want to be a teacher, but then I went traveling and became a scuba diving instructor, and they're like, it's just a teacher, it's just a
Ooh.
beach bum version. I'm like, you're not wrong.
Mm.
And same as that surf instructor I was speaking to you about earlier.
Yeah.
His mum is a teacher, and I'm like, it's in the blood.
Yeah.
You'll be really good at it. I just find it quite interesting that even I was like, I don't want to join the family business, but I the second I did a lesson, I was like, oh, I should have done that sooner. Yeah, I just tried not to for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone that as soon as I walk into the classroom and start teaching, I feel as if I've come home. It makes me feel so happy every day whenever I'm teaching. I just love it, and say 20 plus years, and I still absolutely adore it.
That's the thing. I do love it a lot. My mum retired at 72, so I'm hoping I'm not still working at that point. She was like, well, all my friends volunteered 2 days a week, so I might as well teach because I love it and get paid for it.
Yeah.
I was like, fair enough. COVID, when she had to learn how to teach through Teams, that was a very testing time in her career. She was like, no, this might be the end of me, but she did it. She coped with it and did it. I mean, I think she did better on it than me. My tutor groups just stitched me up, so they were we had live kind of tutor meetings once a week, and mine were like, let's have a dress up Friday and we'll all wear different hats, and I wore a whole flamingo costume, and I turned up and one kid was in a Mexican hat and me in a flamingo, and that was it out of 30 kids, and they just laughed at me the whole half an hour, sat there as a flamingo. But I won't forget it. Like that's the fun side that I'm going to remember from COVID. And also you do get, especially with the teenagers, you get the sarcasm and the funny side, but there's just so much warmness that you can go into work and feel rubbish, but actually you can come out of it feeling amazing because somebody said something and you just giggled, or you've finally had something click, and it's not like any other sensation, I don't think, teaching.
Oh, it really isn't. I have so many silly stories from my classroom. My mum now has Alzheimer's, and she can't necessarily have a sort of a conversation easily because she can't necessarily hold on and remember what you're saying. So I just regale her with tales from the classroom every day, and I just tell her these silly stories of things that have happened, because every single day without fail, and for her, teaching is a really common language. She understands it, she remembers her time in the classroom, she remembers her time as a teacher, and she remembers it really fondly. So for her, talking about teaching is just the nicest thing, and she just laughs out loud at some of the stories that I come up with, and then she tells me some of her stories, and that's lovely. It really is. It's funny the way teaching is the way that I connect with my mum.
And I think that comes across in your book as well. There's like the warmth and the kind of connection of the people that have written the stories, that they genuinely believe it, and it's their passion is coming over in it.
Yeah, and I think that's it. All too often teaching can be talked about in very negative terms, but actually for me, I love teaching. I actually moved after a very horrible diagnosis back in 2018. I decided to move away from leadership that I'd been in for 5 years, and moved back into the classroom, and I haven't regretted it since. I have accidentally moved back into the leadership, but that was an accident. But I just love it, and what I want people to do when they read the book is actually just feel how wonderful teaching is, and how wonderful it is the fact that we can impact on children, and actually Yeah, it's a wonderful thing, teaching. It's not a bad thing.
And that's I can't remember which story it is, but there's the story of the teacher that has the confession that she's been at the same school for 20 years.
Oh,
She
that's
went for a
Lucy.
job
Yeah.
somewhere else and was like, no, we're coming back. And it's just like it's okay to stay where you are, and it's okay to take a step
Yeah,
down or a sideways move. It's about what makes you happy and keeping your love of teaching.
absolutely. And I think it's so true that often we say, oh, you need to move on. Oh, you've been here too long. You need to move on. Or you've been in the same year group for too long. And it's okay. It's absolutely okay to do whatever feels right for you. I mean, Lucy loves her school, loves her year group, and so on. And that's perfect. And I think often we just feel that we need to do something different, but actually, it's okay.
It's that kind of, you feel like you've, like the ladder, like you were saying, you feel like you need to go up
Mm,
that ladder. Like I very much feel like a lot of my friends are higher than me. We all started together. I should be there by now. If only I had stayed at my old school, which was very kind of CPD, very quick to push people up. If I'd stayed at that school, I would have been higher by now. But I'm like, but I moved because I had a child, and actually it was a better work-life balance. So it's like,
yeah,
but my life is better because I didn't stay and go in that. But it's very, very hard not to listen to those voices, and I suppose inner voices of like, oh, I should be there by now. But it's I think also if a school has staff that have been there that long, like I've got one our he's now our assistant head, but I think he's been there for years and years and years. There's quite a lot of staff that have been there long times and seen like 3 or 4 heads come through, and I just think
mm.
it's quite nice when there are teachers that have been there the whole way through.
I think it's so important. It really is. The school that I work in, lots of people just remain there, and I, it's I love it there. I absolutely love the school I teach in, and it's really nice because it's a strong community where people aren't moving on very much. And you know, I didn't know that I'd remain there that this long, and I don't think it's unlikely, and if my head teacher's listening, I'm really sorry, but it's unlikely they're ever going to lose me because I just love it there. I
Yeah.
really do. I have no desire to move on, and I think that's okay. But back in 2018 when I sort of left leadership, I threw away the ladder because I was very much actually, my body is not well. I need to do what's right for me, and I don't want to do this bit, and I sort of want to go and do something that brings me joy, which is the teaching. And I sort of threw away the ladder, and then ever since I've been sort of recreating things. So I've sort of, I see it more as a climbing wall, which I talk about in the book. The fact that actually we don't necessarily have a career ladder. There's a career climbing wall, and you can create all your different paths. And sometimes you may just want to stay where you are, and sometimes you might want to move up a bit, and sometimes you might want to go down a rung or two, and that's all okay because it all depends on where you are and what you're doing in your life at that moment. When you had a baby, you probably just wanted to pause for a bit because having a baby is quite challenging.
And I
And
think it's that, isn't it? It's working out how to have the balance and know that it's okay that you don't have to do it all constantly.
mm, I think that's it. I was coaching a 25-year-old um, a while ago who basically had mapped out their entire career, and by the age of 29, they were going to be a head teacher.
Yeah, wow.
And I was just like, for me, my question is always, is it going to bring you joy? Like, is that going to bring you joy? Smashing it out and hitting that point. And actually, if you become a head teacher at the age of 29 and you don't retire until 67, that means you're going to be in headship for 38 years. Is that what you want? Because
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like, what is it you want, and is it going to bring you joy? And for
And I
me,
wonder, yeah, I
mm,
wonder whether that contributes to burnout a little bit as well, with
yeah,
earlier teachers taking on head of year roles or head of
hmm
subject roles or earlier on than they should when they haven't necessarily honed their craft, and then they can't cope because it's just too much pressure.
I think honing their craft, I love that phrase, because I truly believe teaching is a craft. And I think the first thing we need to do as teachers is to hone our craft and really learn to teach well so we are comfortable in our classrooms. Only then do we take on extra responsibility. And actually, once we've honed our craft isn't unbelievably challenging and doesn't take hours and hours and hours of preparation as such. And it's then when you can take in the extra stuff. But I think because of the pressure to run on, because of this pressure, because I don't know what this thing is about people needing to be, in senior leadership posts by the age of 30, but it seems to be a thing at the moment. It's like, actually, if we have to keep going until we're 68, that's 38 years where you're going to be in some form of leadership role, when actually you've spent X number of years at university learning to teach. So you're going to teach for a couple of years and then do a job that you didn't actually train in.
Yeah. That's why I'm kind of quite happy with my apprenticeship and taking my time and making sure I know everything before I get into it. Like, I don't want
Absolutely.
I want to be able to offer something and bring something to the table. I don't want to go there just literally just having enthusiasm. I want to go and be able to actually do the job properly and make a difference and do it well. And I think necessarily, like, there's lots that are going up early and aren't able to haven't got the skills yet. So it's kind of quite interesting. I don't know whether I would be very intrigued to find out at what point people generally leave teaching, as to whether it's I know quite often it's within the first few years because they just can't kind of cope with it. But then what the next bit is, do people leave when they kind of hit senior leadership and then realise that actually this is harder than they thought, or whether or they're just retiring earlier because they've been doing it for so long, they're too exhausted. It'd be quite interesting to see kind of where the other end of the spectrum is.
I think it's an interesting one. I think when people go into senior leadership, once they're there, it is tricky to then go back into the teaching, because you sort of think, oh God. I mean, I remember when I went back into teaching and I really worried that people would think I'd failed. Like, I've got a really nice Ofsted with my name on, but I really worried that people would think that I had failed because I was suddenly back teaching again. And actually, it was a choice, and it was a considered choice, but I worried. And I think, the people that stay in teaching are the people that I've got a friend, and she started at the same time as me. And all she's ever done, that sounds awful, is teach. That's what she wanted to do. And I remember having so many conversations with her, well, do you not want to do this? And do you not want to do this? And she said, no, I just want to teach. And she is so happy, because what she is doing is what she loves doing, rather like your mum. I think that's the thing. When we are doing what we love, we're happy. But when we're sort of out of our comfort zone and living in a way that we feel we should, it's that, I should do this, I should progress in my career, I should go for this, for this job. And then we're doing something that actually doesn't feel as happy and joyful. Then we suddenly go, oh, actually, I think I'll leave. And I do wonder if, a lot of senior leaders who suddenly realise that they're doing a job that is not, in a sense, is nothing to do with what they trained to do. I do wonder if that's when they then go, actually, I need to leave education, and that's really sad.
It brings me around to your kind of, what is it, the big wins for tiny voices, the saying no. That's the bit I feel like everybody needs to master. I'm very much like, yes, of course I'll do that. Yeah, no problem. But learning to say no and put those boundaries in is so important, especially early on in your career.
It's really hard. I think now that I'm quite long in the tooth, I'm quite good at saying no. But I think it is really challenging when you are being asked, and especially when you are really wanting to shoot up the career ladder, to actually say no, to look at the big picture and go, oh, do you know what? That's really unmanageable. to say no, so that you avoid, as you said, that burnout. You avoid that burnout. You're looking at the big picture and thinking, is this going to work? And I think that phrase of "can I get back to you" is just great.
Oh, I like that.
So
Yeah.
rather than saying no, you can just go, "Oh, can I get back to you on that one?" Because I think that's great. It just gives you an out in that moment. And then you can email later with a no or a different suggestion. Another one that I've worked on with my coach is a great one, which is saying, "I'll tell you what I can do. I'll tell you what I can't do. I
Oh,
can do
that's
this.
good. Yeah.
I can't do this." And then you close it. He always says, "Close the gate." So I think that for me really works. I'll tell you what I can do, and this is what I can't do.
And also,
And
I suppose finding out what the criteria is first, because quite often you
yeah.
say yes, and actually it ends up being way more than you think it is, and now you've said yes,
Oh,
and you can't
yeah.
back out of it, or it's like, oh, actually, I thought I'd get game time for that, and actually I'm not, and now I don't have time to do it, and when am I going to do it? And it's, but I've said yes, so I can't. So I think it's teachers having that kind of script that they can slow that down, have that pause, set out expectations, and I think that's great.
Yeah, it's for me, I think that's absolutely vital, because I used to be someone that said yes to everything, and then I'd be drowning underneath it and would be vaguely resentful about the fact that I was doing all this work, you know.
And it's that kind of like the bigger voices shout louder, but actually
Mm,
the smaller voices can be heard, and it's just making sure that you're not afraid to kind of speak out when things are too much, and that's one thing I've learned at my school with having teachers that have been there for a really long time. When new heads come in, they do go, actually, that's not going to work for us, or have you considered that? We're not overly happy
yeah,
to do that. And I've never seen that before happen, and I think it's really interesting to see that, and kind of almost like heads of department working as a collective of being like, actually this isn't working for us, or actually we need this, and listening to the teachers is really important when you are in senior leaders, and kind of work again, having that collective voice and not being afraid to let it be heard.
yeah. I was at a headship conference a couple of months ago, actually, and I was talking about tiny voices, and I was asking them who they listened to. And I didn't ask them to give me any answers as such, but I was just interested in who do they listen to in the staffing body, because I wonder, I think all too often senior leaders can listen to senior leaders, but actually those tiny voices that are so quiet that they're often not heard have an awful lot to say and an awful lot of wisdom. We are those tiny voices are the ones that usually are teaching, usually don't sort of say very much at meetings. And actually, as I say, they have so much wisdom. And I was fascinated to know if anyone actually listened to those tiny voices, because I think if every single leader listened to those voices, just like you were saying your school does, I think there's an awful lot to be said for that, because those voices hold so much information.
And it's yeah, and I think it is that kind of having the confidence to say it, especially if you're starting at a new school as well, and or kind of getting a vibe of what everyone else is feeling, because quite often you can feel like, oh well, that's what everyone else is doing, so I must do it. And
Mm,
actually, kind of there's quite often better ways of doing things. It's just making a voice heard. And I think that brings me back to the dyslexic side, is that I know that when I was in meetings at my old school, and we're like, right, we need to do this, I'm like, well, why don't we do this? And everyone's like, I never ever thought about that, because I know I think
mm,
about things differently, and things that I think are an obvious solution are not obvious to everybody else. So it's interesting kind of seeing and hearing the way other people do things. And I think sharing practice and going and seeing other people teach as well is really interesting, and kind of not being kind of stuck in my own little bubble, that I do kind of see it as a school and a community
yeah.
of teachers.
Yeah, you've brought to mind, actually, last year, someone came and worked in our year group who was new to the school and new to the year group, and she just kept asking why. And it was the most bizarre thing because you'd say, oh, we're doing X, Y, Z. And she'd go, why? And you'd be like, because the actual explanation is so, because we are. And actually, what I found was that why, it was brilliant. I absolutely love her to bits. And the fact that she just asked why made us really think deeply about why we were doing these things. And I thought, what courage to start at a new school, to start in a new year group, and to just say why. And I said to her one day, why do you always ask why? And she said, because I want to understand. I thought, wow, yeah, of course, that's why she was asking. But I don't think I know that I'd never started a new school and had the courage to say why to people that were just sort of, been doing, well, this is what we've done for the last 50 years, we just wheel it out. But instead she would go, but why? Why do we do that? And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I mean, she was a real inspiration for the Tiny Voice Talk.
I suppose it's that buy-in, isn't it? If you can understand why something works and why it happens the way it does, then they're more likely to understand it. I had that with a trainee. They were like, oh, I need to assess something because that's what my target is for this week. And I was like, well, but why are we going to do that? It has to benefit the kids. So we're not just going to assess it for the sake of it. And we're not going to just assess one class because that benefits that class and not everyone else. So we're all going to do it. So if you want us all to assess, you need to explain to us why we're assessing and what's going to benefit that child. And it was like a complete click in her mind that it was like, oh, okay. I've actually got to think about why I'm doing it. I'm not just doing it to tick a box.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that a lot of schools get drawn into, especially with Ofsted, that they need to tick boxes, and actually being that voice of kind of, no, why are we doing this? It needs to, how does it benefit the kids? Is kind of needs to be the mantra. That's my mantra. Like, if it doesn't benefit the kids, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. It really, absolutely. And I think my book, I don't even know if we do refer to Ofsted in it, but
no, I don't think I read Ofsted anywhere, which is nice.
No,
I've ruined it. I brought it up.
I don't teach for Ofsted. I teach for the children in front of me, and I don't believe that any of the contributors teach for Ofsted. They teach to the children in front of them, and I think that is so critical. Ofsted are there. We can't get rid of them. They're there, but that doesn't mean that I need to teach or plan or mark for them. I need to do that for the children in front of me. And that, I think, was, again, so important. And I suppose the whole tiny voice thing, Ofsted's one of those big voices, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those big voices that says you must do this or you mustn't do this. But actually, we are the ones that really, really are living and breathing on the ground.
Which leads me on to, I was kind of trying to remember my favourite kind of ones. I really like the tiny steps for better well-being. I'm on my well-being committee, so I find it really interesting. But that kind of, but it was quite nice in the fact that it was kind of almost transferable to the students as well, and thinking about kind of their well-being and the kind of the breathing techniques and things like that. Just simple things that actually teachers could kind of, if all students knew that, and it's like, right, okay, can you just count backwards, and it just kind of little things that can make big differences, I think, are important. And it's staff well-being as well as student well-being, but I'd never thought to put the two together before.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I think if one of the best ways that I look after my well-being is teaching things to my children, because they'll remind me I have to do it. Mrs. Bono, we haven't done our breathing today. Oh, right, everyone, let's do our breathing then. And it does. It's brilliant. It centers me.
And have you got a favourite one? Are you allowed to say if you've got a favourite one?
I don't. I have ones that I don't have any specific favourites, but I think that there are some that, like, the one that really made me think was the Understanding Schemata in 5 quotes. That was like oh my goodness. I remember reading it initially and just going, whoa. But I think chapter 22, which was the Who Am I, that really resonated with me. And again, comes back to what I've we've talked about before, earlier on in here, which is the fact that we're very other-centered. And often educators can lose sight of who they are, who we are, who I am. Who am I? Who is Toria? And I think that's really important. In order to be a really good teacher, in order to be a really good leader, I need to know who I am, what matters to me, what my values are. And actually, that very much knowing who I am means that then I'll know where I'm best placed to work, because actually I need to work somewhere where my values mesh with the values of the place that I'm working in. And that chapter, I can't say it's my favourite because none of my favourite. But
I feel like it's like your class, that you love them all equally.
Yes, exactly. But that question and considering it, I feel we don't do enough of as teachers. And I think for me, that one's an absolute go-to chapter, because I think every single teacher needs to understand who they are, and leader, I would say, who they are, what matters to them, and what their values are, because only then do you know where you want to go. And I think that then naturally leads to whether or not you want to climb that ladder or do something different or whatever else, because you know who you are.
And I think that's it. And it's okay to kind of be a little bit individual and kind of let students see part of yourself. You don't have to be this separate entity with this whole facade up. Like, you can let your personality come out, and everyone's going to teach slightly differently, because everyone's personality is slightly different, and everyone's strengths and weaknesses are slightly different.
Yeah, completely. I remember very early on in my career thinking that I needed to be like the woman next door. And I couldn't be, because I'm me. I'm apparently, according to people that watch me teach, I'm very individual. And I don't know what that means exactly. But I can't be someone else in the classroom. I just have to be me. And I can't be someone else in leadership. I just have to be me. I have to be who I am. And I think that's so utterly vital. We cannot be the person in the next classroom or the leader in the next office. We have to be who we are and be our authentic selves in order to really serve the children and the community as best we can.
And nobody knows the children better than you. Like, you know the pupils that you teach, and your gut and your knowledge is what's going to get them there.
Absolutely. Sometimes, because I'm a year 4 teacher and I have my children 24/7, I think sometimes they're sick to death of how well I know them.
It's when you get called mum, I get it all the time. I'm like, nope. I'm like, we're in secondary school now. We shouldn't be doing that still.
Yeah. But it then shows you how much you matter in that moment to that child.
It is. I feel like I'm at the time of the year where it's quite emotional, where like a cohort leaves and you kind of lose them. And I suppose it's the same in primary school if you're like a year 6 teacher, or seeing the kids that you've passed on kind of move along. It's kind of every year you're like, I've done good. I'm going to send them out into the world, and they'll be all right. They'll be okay. You've kind of left them in a good place.
Well, as you've read the book, you'll know my love of butterflies, and my classroom is festooned in butterflies. I have them everywhere. And on the last day of term, I wear a butterfly skirt. And I wear the butterfly skirt because I tell all my children that they began at the beginning of the year as caterpillars. And now I'm releasing them into the world as butterflies. And butterflies for me are there. I just adore them, as I say. But for me, they are very much my little people finding their wings and flying at the end of the year.
I love that. I love that metaphor. It's lovely. And we have reached 7:30. Gosh, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. We've been chatting.
Well, I've got to say, when you said 7:30, I was thinking, goodness, I don't think I'll be able to go for an hour and a half. But I've clearly I'm not quiet.
I've enjoyed our rants and putting the teaching world to rights, but also kind of letting some of those voices be heard. And I just cannot recommend the book enough. I really enjoyed it. And considering I'm dyslexic, I read it really quickly as well. And for me, I really struggle to read, but I enjoy it. And I really enjoyed kind of listening to this and hearing your voice and hearing the other people's voices as well. There's just so much that resonates with teachers, and there's something for everybody. Like you said, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, there's something that everybody can get out of it.
Well, I'm so grateful you said that, and thank you so much for talking so kindly about the book. You know, Tiny Voices Talk is, yeah, I'm incredibly proud of it, and I'm incredibly proud of the fact that in that book are 37 voices that are now being heard, and hopefully will empower others to use theirs.
They certainly will. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you tuned in a bit late, this will be available to listen back to shortly. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.